Big news this morning is what came out of the steps of the Supreme Court and headquarters of the Judiciary yesterday, when the Judicial Service Commission emerged and they said that they had arrived at a nominee for the position of Chief Justice of the Republic of Kenya following the interviews that took place on the previous 10 days, concluding on Friday last week. And they said that Lady Justice Martha Koome of the Court of Appeal is their nominee for position of Chief Justice, and they forwarded that name to the President for the next course of action. Now, the nomination of Martha Koome to the position of Chief Justice brings in very many firsts, and that's what is all over the headlines. Number one, if she becomes the Chief Justice, Lady Justice Philomena Mwilu is the Deputy Chief Justice. Then we have Chief Justice and Deputy Chief Justice, who are both women for the first time in Kenya. In addition, of course, to being the first woman Chief Justice in Kenya. In addition to talking about the next phase of the judiciary, following the retirement of Justice David Maraga, now ushering in a new era, let's work with the assumption that Martha Koome will actually be confirmed and be appointed and sworn in as Chief Justice of the Republic. What does this mean to the judiciary? Is it a new phase? Is it a continuation of the system? Is it a status quo? Do we expect to see some radical changes in terms of the direction and thinking of the judiciary? She will be the chair of the Judicial Service Commission, president of the Supreme Court. What are we likely to see? What did she say during her interviews that she would like to see done in the judiciary, for example, on several things? On the matter of backlog of cases, she said, this is a problem and it needs to be solved immediately. Back then we were few, but somehow we managed. Now we are many, but we cannot manage. What needs to happen is for every judge to have their own docket. We need a case management system. This is a solution that she said she'd propose for dealing with the backlog of cases. The dilemma of the 41 judges who are yet to be appointed by the president. This must be resolved through negotiations, she said. We're independents as judiciary and nobody should attempt to take its dependence. It's independence. Therefore, when the right hand doesn't agree with what the left hand is doing, the body suffers, and that is Kenyans. When I look at the judiciary, we were interdependent as far as delivery of service is concerned. Where do we come together? We will hold regular meetings with the executive and the legislature to end the standoff. We must discuss the issues of appointment of the 41 judges with the president, find out where the problem is, and resolve it. This is assuming that the president is going to give her the audience that he denied Justice Maraga, according to Justice Maraga, right? So a number of things that she said that she'd like to do, she'd like to see done, she'd like to see happen. The question that I also asked, when we talk about the 41 judges who were nominated by the Judicial Service Commission, who ought to have been appointed by the president, who haven't been appointed by the president yet, despite court cases, court orders, is there a likelihood that the president sits on this one? And then what?
Well, if he does, then what, really? That's the question. If he does, then what?
Because as he had done in the past, what happened? Was there any kind of earth-shaking, rattling kind of movement because of the fact that he had not appointed?
Yes, there
Did
was.
anything change as a result of it?
Yes.
What?
Justice was denied to the citizens of Kenya.
Is that a change from what it was before?
It's a serious change.
It became a very
It was
big
still
policy
being denied
question.
previously, right?
No. With the appointment of those new judges, this was likely to change because it would fast-track that process of justice being provided. And the moment that was denied, then essentially we rolled back time.
Justice was not being provided. And so that is why the appointment of these 41 judges was being requested. They were not appointed. Justice was still not being.
No, it was worse. It was worse. It was worse.
Denial of justice was worse.
They just continued.
Yes, it was worsened. It was worsened. Because if you're talking about crime, are we saying that crime in this country is lessening? Is it increasing? Or is it static? What is it? By the time a request was made for these number of judges, it isn't just that we had issues that needed to be dealt with, but the truth is we had backlogs. Okay? So you deal with the backlog, then you deal with what's happening on a daily basis. The situation did not remain static. It got worse.
The Standard has a story by Kamotho, who says they tried reaching the nominee Chief Justice yesterday. Her phone was very busy. Our conversation was short when we got through to her. She assured us all was well for judiciary and the country. These are her words. You are in safe hands, and I thank God that you prayed for me. Words of CJ nominee Martha Karua. Martha Koome, I beg your pardon. Hey. Let's bring in a constitutional lawyer, Kamotho Waiganjo, to look at... Hey, it's okay. To look at the new phase of the judiciary. If Martha Koome is appointed and sworn in as the next Chief Justice. Good morning, Kamotho.
Morning, Eric and team. How's everybody?
Doing well,
very well, thank you, Kamotho.
I'm very well, yeah, thanks.
Very good. Now, Kamotho, let's work with the assumption that the Justice Koome actually gets appointed and sworn in as the next Chief Justice. Does this usher in a new phase in the judiciary, in your opinion?
I wouldn't say so much a new phase as was a new phase in the Justice William Mutunga days, but it continues the process of constitutionalization of the judiciary and the creation of a strong institution that I think has sometimes struggled, particularly in the last tenure of Justice Maraga, not because Justice Maraga had competence issues, but particularly because of the very unfortunate relationship between the judiciary and the executive. One hopes, because this is the thing that has made the judiciary not be as effective as it could have been, which led to cuts in funding for the judiciary, led to the non-appointment of the now 40 judges. So one hopes that what we had started in the Justice Mutunga days in terms of a total renew and re-engineering of the judiciary will continue under Justice Martha Koome. But I think one of the things to say is that in terms of capacity, in terms of competence, in terms of integrity, in terms of substance, in terms of sobriety, she obviously is one of our best judges. One can say she's our best, but she's one of our best. If you had not even been interviewing and you are looking for a judge within the judiciary, she would definitely have been one amongst your top 5. In fact, I can almost say that most people who listened to her during the interview hoped against hope that she would be appointed, but it didn't look like, when you looked at the possible permutations, the handshakes, the fact that the current DCJ is a lady, most people had written her off, even though they agreed that in terms of the interviewees, she's one who came out the best. And this is not just about the interview. Justice Martha Koome has a history. So in a sense, yes, there's a new thing in terms of approach. I am sure it's going to be different probably from Justice Maraga's approach. But the newness of the judiciary was already, reinforced by the Constitution. So what she does is to ensure that now those constitutional provisions now have faith in terms of implementation. Yeah.
Kamotho, do you see then with those things that you mentioned, sobriety and, being extremely focused as an individual, and then the issues that the judiciary had been facing more recently than not, do you see then these attributes that she does have would then be able to go in the direction of solving some of these perennial issues?
I think she has the capacity. From the time when I started practice in the late 80s, mid-80s, late 80s, Martha Koome and a group of hers were the most active lawyers within the then very vibrant law society, which was seeking the pushing for the second liberation. One of the things I remember about her is she was your ultimate consensus builder. She's very firm, but she's your ultimate consensus builder. And one prays and hopes that she'll use those skills, which I'm sure she has improved in her times as a senior judicial officer, to help move this process. I have said, and I've said this before, that one of the things that unfortunately Justice Maraga missed is the recognition that he's not just called upon to be a good judge, and a good jurisprudent and a good administrator of the judiciary, one of his most important roles is to ensure that the relationship between himself and therefore the institution of the judiciary and the other two arms of government operates efficiently, and effectively. And that calls for very special skills, negotiation skills, people relation skills, so that the institution plays its role as one of the arms in the governance system. I think if you fail to do that, however good you are as a judge, however much of a person of integrity you are, the judiciary suffers, because these are our realities, that you need to move these three institutions in the same direction as much as possible. Now, of course, in the nature of things, there will be disagreement. There are times when the judiciary will make decisions that the government will not support, and that is only natural, it's only fair. But I think if the relationships were reasonable and were well managed, we wouldn't need to have the sort of push and pull that was there before. And you can compare that with Justice Mutunga's season. William Mutunga was, in quotes, an activist in the sense that he had very strong progressive views, but he still managed to maintain fairly good relations with the executive, even though the judiciary even then were making decisions willy-nilly against the executive, but somehow he was able to manage that relationship a lot better, a lot more pragmatically, which unfortunately suffered in this season. And maybe there are very many other factors behind that failure. I don't want to place that squarely on
I'm glad you haven't done that, because I was going to ask you that, because I was going to say, yes, William Mutunga did a sterling job, but he had a different president he was working with.
Yeah.
And yes, there are things Justice Maraga may have done, but surely the dispensation that Maraga is working in is also a different one. And is it to be desired that, or are we to say, judging from what we saw, that his actions were in essence not, should we say, geared towards ensuring that the core function that his particular office was supposed to carry out was carried out, and in balancing it, surely the part that is played by the other arms of government is also crucial. And if you look at our history has been, for the longest time prior to the Kibaki government, we had a judiciary that was more or less part and parcel of the executive. So the movement away from it began with Justice William Mutunga, and in the era of Maraga, one could argue we had a government that seemed to have been clawing back gains that had been made during that period. So there was going to be conflict either which way, whether Maraga did what he did.
The biggest diplomat on earth.
Yes, there was going to be conflict. So long as one wanted to follow the dictates of the law and to do it as they should, there was going to be conflict. Now, let me ask the question. For instance, the issue of the 40 judges. If you have an executive that has the interests of the people at heart, how does the good relationship with the Chief Justice come into play?
Now, I don't want this to be an analysis and whatever.
Oh, don't worry, Kamotho. I'm always making it that. So
yes. But the reason being that the good judge is not there to give us their perspective. But let me say this: when you come into office as the head of the judiciary, whose independence is already constitutionally assured, you're no longer fighting the fights we had in the 90s. We have a place where your funding is assured, your appointive process is assured, at least your nomination process is assured. You must also take the time to also understand who you're working with, both in the legislature and in the judiciary and in the executive, and you must understand then how to manage those. And that is, leadership is about not working with good people. It's managing to work with all manner of people, with whom you are required for your institution to succeed to work with. And I think there are skills that would have been used differently that would have made it easy. I'm not sure that, one can then say if 1, 2, 3 was done, then this would have been guaranteed. But I think there are certain things that could have been done differently. I would think that where the rain, and I know this will be a very controversial issue, one of the places where the rain started beating us is even in the nullification of the election. And don't forget that before that time, the relationship between the judiciary and the executive was fairly manageable.
Yeah.
Was if looking back, if you were to honestly, review the process that led to the nullification of the election, I think the responsibility of a prudent judiciary is to ask not just the legal questions, but you must also ask the economic questions, you must ask the social questions, you must ask the political questions. I think, in my view, that the judiciary was so concerned with the technical legal issues that they failed to understand that an election process is also a political process, and that when you make a decision of that nature, what it does is that it places the executive in a natural area of contestation with yourselves at a point when your legs are still fairly are not, your foundation are not strong enough, and you pick a battle that you may not be able to finish. Now, if it was based on substance, on fundamental reasoning, if you're able to say that if you nullify this election, the result, because of what you found out, the results could have been different, then yes. But I think some of those decisions, and that's what I'm talking about sometimes, there's a level of recklessness, and that therefore then pushed the executive to the point where it considered the judiciary an enemy that needed to be fought. And I'm just saying there's some of those things, looking back, that could have been managed differently. The issue of one of the issues that arose about the advisory opinion that was given about the dissolution of parliament. Again, there are certain processes that required, a little more consideration, because some of those steps are then perceived by some in the executive to be a reckless fight against the executive, as opposed to pushing the rule of law. So I'm just saying that there are certain things, in my view, that needed to be managed differently. History will judge Justice Maraga positively or negatively, but I think there are certain skills that I think the Justice Martha Koome brings on the table that I think will be more helpful, not so much so that they agree with the executive. There will be times to disagree, but that when there's a disagreement, it is understood that the judiciary is purely playing its role as an adjudicator, as opposed to, this is a contestation between two arms of government as to who, will be able to carry the day. And that is a question of nuancing. It's a question of perception, and it's a question of, pragmatic management of leadership. But I'm sure these are contested positions, and but I think it could have been that different. Finally, you raised, my brother, the issue of the 40 judges. I think it's unfortunate that the executive refused to appoint judges who had been appointed through a process that is provided for in the Constitution. The executive is represented in the JSC, significantly. Yeah. It's unfortunate that we got there. It was absolutely unnecessary, and one hopes that we are not going to have to go. But I think what had happened is that by that time, this was more now a flexing of muscles between two institutions. Having said that, of course, some issues were raised about whether some of the judges had issues. One would have hoped that those issues would have been brought up in the interview process. If they were or if they were not, if opportunity was not given, then I think there's a problem in the process that needs to be looked at. But I do think that there are certain issues that needs to be resolved. If, by the way, and this is the last point I'll make on the matter, I, at this point, do not even see why we take judges of the High Court and judges of the Court of Appeal, who are purely senior civil servants doing an education job, through the process of appointment by the chief executive. In my mind, once JSC appoints those people, and if we are to do amendments that will help the judiciary, once the JSC appoints those people, those judges, they should actually just continue to work. When
just
it comes
a promotion.
to justice and the deputy chief justice, then it makes sense. Because
so you're saying the JSC shouldn't have oversight?
No. I'm saying the JSC should just appoint.
Yep.
I don't see why we have to go to the executive.
Basically, just promote them.
Yeah, just promote them, and they continue working. The place where the executive should be coming in is the chief justice and the deputy chief justice, because they play also a quasi-political role. Okay. But the other people who just dispense justice, it doesn't make sense why we go through that process. But that is an issue of reform as we continue to improve the judiciary.
So finally, then, Kamotho, as we conclude this conversation with you this morning, what do you see in coming days? What are the next steps? Now the JSC has forwarded the name to the president. What should we expect in the coming days?
I expect that Justice Martha Koome's appointment will be approved by Parliament. Obviously, if there are issues that can be raised before the House that are substantive, then let those be raised and let the National Assembly make a decision. I'd be very surprised if that was not done as quickly as possible. There's a huge docket that awaits the good judge. That issue of the dispensation, the access to justice question, in terms of the numbers of judges, most of the courts are not functional. The Environmental and Land Court, the Court of Appeal, these courts are really struggling. And so part of her immediate responsibility is to ensure that is resolved as quickly as possible in whichever manner, so that those judges are sworn in on the day after she's sworn in. Then, of course, she needs to continue the work of expansion of the judicial system to ensure that people have access across the country. She needs to ensure that the whiff of corruption, which is starting to creep back into the judiciary, is completely eradicated. Fortunately for her, she comes with a fairly clean slate, so she should be able to give leadership in that respect. And then she does need to resolve an issue that was clear from the interviews, which is the sort of contestation on jurisprudence between particularly the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court, and sometimes the inconsistencies in the Supreme Court itself in its decisions. I think there's work that needs to be there to ensure that the courts and its decisions are predictable, and so she has a lot of work to do. She needs to work on the relationship with the executive, but at the same time to ensure that the judiciary is not subservient. And the reason why it will not be subservient is that short of the sorts of issues that arose with the appointment of judges, the independence of the judiciary as an institution is constitutionally assured.
Yeah.
What needs to happen is to ensure that independence, which is assured by the Constitution, finds expression in the day-to-day activities of the judiciary. And the issue of funding, it's very unfortunate that Parliament has chosen to punish the judiciary sometimes by denying it adequate funding, so that you have an institution that has judges, and judicial officers all over the country, in Longalani, everywhere, being allocated 15 billion shillings, and Parliament gets 30 billion shillings with 400 odd members and sitting in Nairobi. There's something fairly unjust and inconsistent. And I think what Parliament fails to understand is that it is not the judiciary it is punishing. It is not Justice Maraga. It is even on the appointment of judges. The failure to appoint judges does not affect Justice Maraga or the judiciary at a personal level. It is the citizens who pay the price, who are very, very heavy price. And I think that is something that Parliament and the allocators of resources must understand. When they do not allocate reasonable resources, it means people stay longer in police cells because you don't have judicial officers. It means that judgments take longer. It is Kenyans who pay the price. So managing, and that's what I'm saying, being able to manage that so that the days of contestation are over, until it becomes absolutely necessary. And sometimes it might become.
Yep.
I think that is really going to be what will determine whether she ends up being a remarkable Chief Justice that we remember fondly.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, constitutional lawyer Kamotho Waiganjo. We look forward to seeing the first 100 days, especially of the Chief Justice Martha Koome, once she goes through the entire nomination and appointment process and getting sworn in. Asante sana, Judge, lawyer. Biggest conversation, the Situation Room on Spice FM online, Spice FM KE, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and on KTN Home. We are talking about the nominee, Martha Koome, Justice, Judge of the Court of Appeal, who's now been nominated by the Judicial Service Commission to become Kenya's next Chief Justice. Name forwarded to the President. What's expected now is the President to forward this to the Parliament, and then Parliament to conduct its vetting, and if they approve, then she becomes appointed and sworn in as the next Chief Justice, becoming the first woman to head an arm of government in the history of Kenya. It's a big thing. And if you look at then what also it means that we have a woman we are likely to have a woman Chief Justice, a woman Deputy Chief Justice in the name of Philomena Mwilu, a woman Chief Registrar of the Judiciary in the name of Anne Amadi, a woman Vice Chair, well, currently the one who's chairing the interviewing panel in the Judicial Service Commission is Professor Olive Mugenda, a woman Registrar of the Judicial Service Commission, Wilfrida Mokaya, a woman Registrar of the Supreme Court, Esther Nyayaki, in the Court of Appeal, the acting president. Now that Justice William Ouko is going through these interviews, the acting president of the Court of Appeal is Lady Justice Wanjiru Karanja. Deputy Registrar of the Court of Appeal is Lorraine Ogombe. In the High Court, the principal judge in the High Court is Lydia Chode. Registrar of the High Court, Judy Omange. Presiding judge in the Criminal Division of the High Court, Lady Justice Jessie Lesit. The presiding judge in the Judicial Review Division of the High Court, Justice Pauline Nyamoya. The presiding judge in the Anti-Corruption and Economic Crimes Division of the High Court, Lady Justice Mombi Ngoge. Employment and Labor Relations Court, the presiding judge, Lady Justice Maureen Onyango. The Environment and Land Division, acting registrar, Rose Makungu. In the Magistrates Courts, the assistant registrar, Caroline Kabusho. Inter-tribunals, the acting registrar of tribunals, Anne Asuga. The chairperson of the PP...
Which one?
Public Procurement Division, Disputes Tribunal, Public Procurement Disputes Tribunal, Desmos Nungo, Acting Registrar and Secretary of that Tribunal, Rosalie Naganyo, Small Claims Court Registrar, Stella Kanyeri, Directorates, the Director of HR and Administration, Dr. Elizabeth Kalei, Acting Director for Finance, Susan Oyatsi, Acting Director, Administration and Security Services, Angela Manyala, Deputy Director, Finance, Beatrice Kamau, Deputy Director, HR and Administration, Ruth Kiengo, Assistant Director, Civil Structural Engineering, Engineer Jen Kagiri, Head, Department of Public Affairs, Catherine Omboi, Head, Judiciary Library Services, Ruth Andiva, and we go on and on.
Is this not a wonderful thing?
And on, yes. Right? Even in the Council for Administration of Justice, the coordinator is Irene Omari. The manager of the Court Users Committees is Sylvia Yantet. Magistrates and Judges Association, the president is Justice Jackie Kamau. The vice president is Caroline Kendagor. We go on.
This is a good thing.
It's a good thing. Right?
It's a wonderful thing.
You feel good to hear this.
No, I'm delighted.
Why?
Brave new world. Look, by the time women get to any position of authority, of repute, my friend, they often have to outperform men. They often have to be infinitely better than all the men that were there in competition with them. Yes. So when they get there, rest assured, we have someone who actually deserves to be in that particular position that they are in.
It basically indicates that the judiciary, in terms of meeting the constitutional requirement of ensuring that there is proper gender balance, the judiciary has taken very many strides ahead, right? And also maybe brings in that whole justification for Justice David Maraga's, retired Chief Justice David Maraga's advice to the Office of the President. Look, that Parliament, Constitution, Parliament, hands tied. I am required to advise you to dissolve Parliament. Let's bring in our guest. So we have a couple of minutes to discuss this with her. Marilyn Muthoni Kamuru is a feminist. She's a lawyer. She's a writer. She's a policy analyst. She's one of those who were speaking before the interviews began and saying, we support the women who have put themselves forward. We support their candidacy. And we hope that the Judicial Service Commission gives them a fair shot at becoming Chief Justice of the Republic and Judge of the Supreme Court. Marilyn, you must be very happy you bring me ear to ear this morning.
I'm extremely excited.
Clearly. What does this mean to the push, your push for greater gender representation and gender balance rather in our institutions?
I mean, that's important. But for me, what it actually signifies is, and I think we talked about this last time I was on, the trajectory that we were taking as a country, the quality of leadership, and how we'd really started to water this down. And so having a Chief Justice nominee with, over 30 years of experience, a large amount of it in public service within the judiciary, and across a range of courts, from family courts to environment and justice. And so having somebody with that kind of experience in this role, I think really bodes well for us as a nation. And in terms of just reestablishing a metric for leadership, for the credibility and the competence, as CT was talking about, of leaders, I think that's a really good step for us at a very important time.
When you say good, Marilyn, I want you to expound on it. Are you suggesting that perhaps because of the accomplishments that you have already mentioned, that we can expect that should the president ascend to the position of accepting Martha Koome as our next Chief Justice? Eric, you thought I was going to make the mistake as you. No, sorry. Martha Koome. Yes. Martha Koome. Okay. Do you think that we are in for a revolutionary time in the judiciary?
I think we're in a revolutionary time in Kenya. So, I think that we need to accept. I think that, we have a remarkably young population. We have demands on us as a nation that we are unable to meet for various reasons. And all of that combined is creating a very transitionary and very rocky time. The judiciary has been on a transformational journey since, 2010, under Chief Justice Mutunga, continued under Chief Justice Maraga. So I think what we'd probably see, perhaps actually after, with Chief Justice Koome, should she be confirmed by the National Assembly, would probably be even a bit of a settling in and really a solidification of the transformational agenda that's been occurring at the judiciary for some time now.
So, definitely the chance to be able to see a woman in this position and, the push for that, clearly, as you talk about, is something revolutionary just in that announcement and that selection. Now,
yes.
Do you think that her being in this position will then prove the justification, or rather, what do you see her being able to achieve that will prove a justification for having a push for women being in this position?
So I'm going to be a radical feminist here and tell you that I don't necessarily expect that we're going to get better things from women. That's not why I'm an advocate for women generally. I'm an advocate for good people in great positions. And I think that we can expect great things from Martha Koome should she be confirmed as Chief Justice. And I think that we can see that based on her history of accomplishments. Every single station where she has served, she has made remarkable changes that are relevant to the station. So one of the things that I think is particularly impressive about Justice Koome is how localized her transformation tends to be. I think she spoke at her interview about how when she was in Kitale, she went to Kitale at a time when there were horrible relationships between the bench and the bar. And so that was her first order of business. And then, trying to depopulate and decongest the prisons. So she has a knack for going to a situation, looking at what is necessary, what is needed, what is immediate, and a very people-focused approach. And that I'm really excited about and looking forward to. I'm not running away from discussing her as a first female Chief Justice. I think for me, one of the things that's important is that my generation is the one that ends the generation of first. I want to stop talking about the first woman to do, the first woman to be. And I would like that to end in my generation, because the world of possibilities is really what we want to create for people, across genders, across abilities, across ethnicities. And so the longer that we take to get to first, the harder it is for more people to have expanded scope of possibilities. So while I'm excited about this, I'm also hoping that, in my lifetime, we're going to end the first generation. And we're going to be saying, oh, no, she's a second, third, fourth, fifth. I was listening to Eric read out that whole list of women, and I was like, I would love it if you could read out a list of men at the executive like that. You wouldn't. It's unremarkable, right? That's where I want us to get.
Getting to that position where we are looking at various women in various positions of leadership, in this. I have a fear, and we're going to ask Marilyn this, that people then will start looking at her from that lens of, okay, so now everybody has been campaigning, let's have a woman at the top.
Yeah.
So the level of scrutiny that she's going to get in every decision that she makes is going to come from the additional lens of, you're a woman.
Exactly. And
People have been saying, let's have a woman. So now here you are.
prove it. This is the thing, because then she will be asked to prove it. And unfortunately, as myopic as it sounds, there will be people who will judge her if she does enter into a situation that maybe things will not go right. Unfortunately, she stands at the risk of being judged and pointed fingers and saying, well, you see, we gave this opportunity to a woman and here is what happened. And I think there's a danger that lies there. And I would be I wouldn't want people to use that as reasons to judge. And unfortunately, we're already in a space where people are going to use it.
Yes.
They are going to. They will. You see, it's the proverbial usage of stopping a bird from flying over your head and actually stopping it from building a nest on your head. They are going to say it anyway. Look at what our parliament did. There are people who will brazenly tell you that women cannot do this and women shouldn't do this. Look, it is a good thing for the country when we can actually talk and say that we are a meritocracy, that people who are best suited for the jobs get the jobs. If they happen to be women, well, so be it. So be it.
But then what do you do about that? What do you do about the very many people who are going to judge Justice Martha Koome from that lens of gender?
But
look at what happened to the former Deputy Chief Justice Nancy Baraza. And that whole debacle, judging from the lens of this is a woman.
you know,
That's the reality that we are living in. Are people going to judge her too harshly?
They will. They will. The lenses through
Hello?
which people are going to look at her will be as multicolored and as diversified as we are as a people. And that doesn't really matter. Okay? When Justice Mutunga was appointed, there are those who said, but this guy, he's an activist. Okay? Will he really do a good job of this? When Justice Mara, there are always naysayers. There's nothing you can do about it. They will always be there. The fact of the matter is competent people sat down and made a determination, and here we are. That's what matters. And then what also matters is her carrying out her duties in the way she knows best and bringing in her years of experience into the job. That's what I am looking forward to.
Marilyn, do you expect that same kind of review of Justice Koome's work?
I do. And I think one of the things that we can do in the media, ordinary Kenyans can do, is check ourselves. I mean, we live in a society where some of this is unconscious bias. Some of it is, and we catch ourselves all the time, you know. We have family members who we know have a knack for maybe unconscious bias with ethnicity. You know, we have family members who'd be like, yeah, you know, that's a woman, she's emotional. And I think what we have to do is reflect on the fact that when we feel these things, when we hear these things, what we should be doing is saying, okay, what does that mean? And just interrogate it and just diffuse it, because it will happen. I think Joe and CT are right. It is going to happen. It's inevitable. But we should not fan the flames. We should not give it credibility. We should evaluate the issue on the merits. And I think that's a struggle, that's a humanity struggle. And so we should be a little gentle with ourselves about the fact that it's going to happen. I think what we should be particularly concerned about is the weaponization. And by that I mean that they are this particular targeting that happens of women. I mean, we've seen it in National Assembly and the Senate, for instance, you know, where women have been subjected to extraordinary amounts of violence and harassment, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, and just really being ostracized and marginalized at work. So we should be careful about that. We should be calling that out and holding people accountable, including criminally liable, should that be the case.
Let me ask this question. Even as we look at Martha Koome, she's the center of our attention today and is going to be for quite some time.
Yes.
Do you feel that perhaps a lot more is going to be expected of her than is actually humanly possible for her to achieve?
I think that might be the case. I think that's also the case because of where we are as a nation. I think, Kenyans want a lot from public service and public servants. And I think it's also coming on the backdrop of feeling neglected by, a government that has really fallen short in many areas. And so it is a difficult time for her to be assuming the helm of the judiciary. And we hope and trust that the legislature and the executive are going to understand how necessary it's going to be for the three branches of government to work together to deliver for Kenyans, because I do feel like the demands are up from Kenyans. There is and a lot more impatience as well.
Alongside this question, let me ask, do you think she's equal to the task?
Oh my God, absolutely. I have no hesitation in that at all. I think one of the things, and you mentioned this, CT, is
are you saying I answered my own question?
Well, I'm saying that you are so prescient that you asked it and you hinted at the answer. That competent women, and actually, I'm writing a book, and one of the arguments I make is that really what we have had because of the struggle for women to ascend in institutions is hyper-competent women. It's a level of competence that is required to stand out in a field that generally does not see women as possible. So in order to be seen as possible, you've had to really outperform. And that's really been Martha Koome's history at the judiciary and in other places that she's worked. So I think she's more than equal to the task. I do think that there is nobody who accomplishes things alone, and it's going to be incredibly important that the Supreme Court as a court comes together and is really able to start providing some of the transformative jurisprudence that we need, that the judiciary as an administrative arm is also working consistently on some things that really matter to Kenyans, like, just can we get cases heard on time? Can we try and just make sure that people are out of the justice system within a reasonable amount of time so it's not interrupting and delaying lives and delaying healing for victims and survivors. So she's more than equal to the task, but we all have our parts to play.
How do you think she should chart her course in this with her abilities, which are clearly unquestioned? What would you think would be the important initial steps to take, taking into consideration all that's going on within the country and the judiciary?
Wow, I wouldn't presume to do that for her. And the reason I wouldn't is I think there's also some internal dynamics, and I think we saw that when we were witnessing the JSC interviews. There's some internal dynamics to the judiciary and at the Supreme Court that will also require some very diplomatic maneuvering. And I think that that's usually the first course for anyone who's coming into a position. And I think she hinted at this at her interview when she said, I think they asked her a question about what would you do within the first 30 days or 60 days, and she said, no. I don't have an agenda for the first 30 or 60 days. I need to come in and learn. And that's been her approach, as I said. She likes to have a feeling, a pulse for what is going on and what matters to the people who are there, right? As opposed to coming in and imposing an agenda. And so that's what I would expect would be her approach should she be confirmed. And I'm really hoping that she's going to be confirmed and confirmed quickly.
As we conclude then, Marilyn, what would you say to those who are calling for the opening of the servers, saying the JSC should tell us how she scored and how everybody else who participated in this particular interview scored?
Gosh, are the servers in France? I don't know.
Who knows?
Well, I don't know.
Right? I think that one of the things that we saw with this process, and I absolutely love, is how engaged the public was. And I think maybe Kenyans started to see, wait a second, interrogating potential leaders and interrogating them kind of hard makes a difference. We can see where people are just feigning confidence, but really can't have the competence or the content that requires them to execute a role. I think the challenge for JSC may be that this has not been part of what they had set out to do. But I do think that as the public, we should certainly demand that. And maybe going forward, what we would be asking for is we would like to see the public rankings. We would want to know why you picked a certain candidate over another candidate. understanding, of course, the constitutional and legal requirements, which would also be there. I do think that that's something that's worth pursuing. I think the difficulty for JSC right now would be that the process that they laid out in their booklet, which is on their website, didn't provide for that, and so they might not be able to do that.
All right. Marilyn Muthoni Kamuru, thank you very much for speaking to us today. Marilyn is a feminist. She's a lawyer. She's a writer. She's a policy analyst.
Why don't you call me a constitutional lawyer too, Eric?
I don't know what you practice.
I
didn't know whether you practice criminal law, whether you're a criminal
I
lawyer.
actually don't practice, but you can be a constitutional lawyer without practicing.
Voila. So now that you have you've confirmed that, we shall add that.
Constitutional lawyer.
Asante sana.
Is there anything else we should add?
There are many other things, but it's okay. I'll come back.
Okay.
Super.
5 minutes to 8 o'clock. Kenya's biggest conversation continues. Time for us to take a quick break on KTN Home, on Spice FM, online. We'll be back shortly.